Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh or anywhere you get your podcast from. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Nick Horwat, and this is the first Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast post Sidney Crosby signing his contract extension. So, of course, that's where we're going to lead things off today, breaking down his extension, what it means for the Penguins, and going into a little bit more detail than I did yesterday on the breaking news episode of Tip of the Ice-Burgh. And then, of course, the Pittsburgh Penguins prospects, they went out there and they showed out at Buffalo Harbor Center over the weekend, going undefeated and having a very successful weekend at the Prospects Challenge. We'll break down everything we saw over the weekend up in Buffalo, and then we'll get you ready for training camp because it kicks off tomorrow. Today is Creative Day at the Pittsburgh Penguins, so we'll see a bunch of fun little vignettes and videos that come out from that. But tomorrow, rubber meets the road. Penguins get on the ice. It's going to be a lot of players, a lot to sift through. We'll give you the players that we're keeping an eye on, of course, outside of the obvious names of the Crosby, the Malkin, Letangs, who you should be watching out for if you head up to UPMC Lemieux Complex over the next couple of weeks. Let's get started. And let's start things off where I think everybody is starting things off this morning, whether you're a Penguins show, whether you're a national show, every hockey-related podcast, radio show, television show is starting things off with Sir Sidney Crosby. He finally signs his contract extension. He's been eligible since July 1st, but yesterday he inks his new deal, 2-year extension, $8.7 million AAV. That's, of course, tacked on to the one remaining year of his current 12-year contract that he has left. So 3 more years signed through 2026-27. I gave my initial thoughts yesterday. Horwat, I want to give you the floor here. Your initial thoughts on this deal finally getting done.
Well, it finally happened. I think that is step one for everybody. It finally was signed before we even get into the nuances and the numbers of it all. It's just good that the deal was finally signed and all of the media can finally stop, or they'll still keep going, whatever they want to do, discussing the prospect and the idea of him finding a new team to compete for a cup with. I'll tell you what, it's clearly not going to happen. It doesn't matter what kind of state the Penguins are in. Sidney Crosby will be staying here for the long haul. I think 2 years was a bit more of a surprise to me, but whenever we had the discussion of why wouldn't he take it in a LeBron style 1 to 2 years at a time to see how he's feeling and sign a new deal then? We'll see how that all goes. But at 8.7, I mean, we were all sitting here saying at least 10, right? Maybe 9 to 10, maybe even to 11, because that's the kind of money he could make here or anywhere. But staying at 8.7, he is truly one of a kind. It's hilarious thinking that from 2008, 2009, the year they won their first Stanley Cup, until the year he retires, maybe, we don't know yet, it will have been an $8.7 million cap hit the entire way. Mm-hmm. That superstition is unbelievably hilarious, but also B, I always felt like in the back of my head that, I think I may have even said it on an old episode, 8.7 should be the ground floor for this deal. That it should only kind of go up from there, even with his age. Mm-hmm. He's still one of the most productive players in the league. He's definitely still the best player in the Penguins organization. And you pay him as such. You can pay him whatever you want. 8.7 should be the floor. Mm-hmm. Turned out, that's his ceiling. And maybe not necessarily his ceiling, but you get that he's so committed to that number and committed to letting his front office build a winner around him. And that was said a couple of times by Kyle Dubas, by Sidney Crosby himself on someone's porch, by the way, that keeping that number at a team-friendly number, if he didn't say it, but I'm going to say it, should force Kyle Dubas' hand to put together a strong team next year. It's a little late to do it this year for myriad of reasons, but going into next season with quite a few other players likely coming off the books, there's no reason why Kyle Dubas shouldn't go out and trade for a good piece or go for the big free agent in the offseason, whoever it may be, just go for it. And obviously that's a commitment to make for in the free agent side of it. like an 8-year, 7-year commitment you're looking at for maybe one season. But you have the money, just gun and go for it, especially since they got their best player locked in at, once again, a team-friendly deal for what's going to end up being 19 years of his career, criminally underpaid.
Yeah, I think that is the headline of all of this. Is he continues to be criminally underpaid, but at the same time, is it criminal whenever he's the one that's signing the contracts, especially at this point? Because everybody and their mother said, yeah, well, he's due a raise. And at this point, you would think he's going to take the raise, considering the Penguins are really at the end of their Stanley Cup window, if not already being closed. And he said, no, you know what? I want to just jar that window up a little bit more, just whatever I can do. And by taking 8.7, that's exactly what he did. But you mentioned the flexibility, what that opens the door for. We'll get to that in just a second. But before that, a couple facts and figures about Sidney Crosby's new contract here, and really just Sidney Crosby in general. The first season, you mentioned it, that he signed at $8.7 million was 2008-2009. That $8.7 million counted for 15% of the Penguins salary cap in that season. Going into this season, it will count as 9% of the cap. And that is only going to go down over the 2 years that he just signed because, as we all know, the NHL salary cap is expected to continue to make leaps and bounds as the league continues to make more and more money coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that 9%, I'd be hilarious if those 2 years it went down to 8.7%. It would be something that Crosby, I feel like, had orchestrated. But as of right now, this season, 9% of the Penguin salary cap is Sidney Crosby. Another fact and figure here. Going into this season, Sidney Crosby has the 44th highest salary cap hit in the NHL. 44, which means there are going to be 43 players that are paid more than Sidney Crosby this year. Last year, Crosby finished 9th in MVP voting. Again, 44th is only going to go down because Leon Draisaitl got his extension kicking in next year. You'd have to imagine other players are going to start to make more and more money. Even Lucas Raymond earlier today signed for $8 million. So players are going to jump Crosby by the time this deal is done, which means there's a chance that by the time he retires, he could, one, still be producing at an MVP level again. Could, being a strong and operative word here. But he will be under 50th as far as the highest paid players in the National Hockey League. And the last number that I'll throw out at you, Horwat, and that leads to the conversation we're going to have next. The Penguins are projected to have $19 million still in salary cap space going into next season, which goes into what you said about Kyle Dubas. Crosby wants you to, bring a team around him. It's going to give an opportunity to compete. Taking $8.7 million leaves $19 million in cap space, not to mention outside of Marcus Pettersson, there's not really anybody that's going to take up big salary cap hits within the organization. So that gives you an opportunity to maybe go outside the Penguins organization and go big game hunting a little bit, depending on where that number goes by the end of this season.
Yeah, you're talking about the Penguins have to maybe sign Marcus Pettersson, and that $19 million also accounts for the two contracts that are coming off of the books that aren't even on their team right now. Jack Johnson and Mike Matheson. Jeff Petrie, thank you. I believe they come off different times. I'm trying to load it up. I'm just kind of shooting from the hip at the moment. But those numbers are coming off too. There's going to be a ton of cap flexibility for the Penguins and for Kyle Dubas to go out. And like I said, go big game hunting here to maybe sign someone that maybe it's way too early to spitball for that sort of thing, but just whoever the big free agent may be going into next season, be in on the conversation. If nothing else, you force other teams to pay a higher price and be in those conversations, because if you land them, you have the space to do it. There's all kind of maneuvering that can happen. And especially if you think of the young group of players that are fighting for NHL roles this year, it's going to get interesting whenever what they're going to need to get paid down the line. But I'm fascinated by what kind of maneuvering Kyle Dubas can do with that much cap flexibility going into next season. He signed these short-term deals this past offseason for a reason. He's going to have that space to, like he's been wanting to do, build the Penguins in his image. And from the beginning, Sidney Crosby's been part of that image. I don't think whatever ownership group is up top, whatever GM is in there, whatever president of hockey operations is in there, or head coach for that matter, no one is telling you to create a team without Sidney Crosby as the focal point.
Yeah, 100. I think that's pretty obvious. I mean, you look at the Penguins, Sidney Crosby is the Penguins organization. So you're not building anything without Crosby being first and foremost. Now, the last thing we'll say about the Crosby contract before we move on, because there's plenty to discuss this week as we are getting so close within 25 days of the opening of the National Hockey League season, and the Penguins taking on the New York Rangers on October 9th for their opener. You mentioned earlier this morning on an article for Breakaway on SI that this might not be Sidney Crosby's last contract. What are your thoughts on that? What do you mean by that?
In a way, kind of how we discussed the LeBron James thing, where if he's feeling good at the end of this deal, by all means, sign for another year. If he's feeling good at the end of that one, another one. I'm not going that far ahead. I'm just saying, as long as the production isn't deteriorating, as long as he's fending off bother time as much as possible, at the end of the 2026-27 season, he may be 39 going on 40 into that summer. There's no reason why. If he thinks he can still do it, if the Penguins think they can still do it, like I said, regardless of the state that the Penguins are in, winning or losing, rebuilding or bad, at that point of his career, again, he might even still be able to request an $8.7 million contract. More than likely, you might be able to get him at $870,000. Now,
I wouldn't say more than likely. I would say there is a possibility that Crosby goes out and does something crazy like that.
Yes, but
that's also below league minimum. Let's just put that in the world now. That is below current league minimum. So,
okay, I just forget how the CBA works. I forget if you can do that because he started earlier than that CBA. That being said, still, it's something to watch for if he is still able to produce at a high level. Like I said, he's coming off of a 42-goal season. We think he can have 100 points this upcoming year. We genuinely think that. He was 6 shy of it at the age of 36. I'm getting my numbers confused now. Yeah,
he was 36.
Yep, he was 6 shy of it last year at the age of 36. Going into 37, if the power play can shape itself up and sort of keep, himself in shape, and again, fend off that father time effect, there's no reason why he couldn't notch 100. There isn't. If he's able to do that, 100 points at $8.7 million, sounds really good. Now, going into the seasons following, again, just if he still feels good, he doesn't want his contract or his play to be a burden on the team. Again, one-of-a-kind guy. He doesn't want that to be a burden on the team or their salary cap situation. But if he feels that he can still cut it, can still perform, maybe take a pay cut by then, by all means, he could sign another deal for maybe a year at a time still. That's sort of what I meant by it. Just by the time 27 rolls around, if he still feels he can do it, there's no reason why the Penguins shouldn't have him on again.
Okay. I got 2 things. I like your thinking here. I like it a lot. 2 things. One, if you pay him at the age of 40, $8.7 million, and he doesn't perform up to snuff, you're just paying him back for all the years that he took way less money. So I would have no issue with that at all. And I'm sure most Penguins fans and Penguins, scribes would not have an issue with that at all. Secondly, I don't like the LeBron comparison. I told you that last week. So I will change it up for you and for everybody out there that also does not like the LeBron comparison. Because one, Crosby's not going anywhere. LeBron does that in case he needs to pull the ejector cord.
Yes.
How about following in Marc-Andre Fleury's footsteps, who a couple years ago signed a 2-year contract, wanted a multi-year contract because he didn't want to have the questions after that first year. And then this past offseason, signed a 1-year deal with the Minnesota Wild to say, this will be my last year. And guess what? Marc-Andre Fleury this season will turn 40. So it lines up with Marc-Andre Fleury as well. And I think that is a comparison that more people would like to get behind.
That's, totally fair. I like that. I totally like that. I feel like LeBron just kind of came in as the one who's obviously doing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, but Marc-Andre Fleury, we thought last year was his farewell tour. The Penguins are giving him paintings, doing all these ceremonies. There's the big, he hit 2 big achievements. Here's Marc-Andre Fleury night. And like we asked State of Hoppy, just what is his legacy in Minnesota? He didn't play his whole career there, but he's, it's the state of hockey, and he is one of the greatest goalies of all time, regardless of opinions. just looking at the numbers, that's what he is. It's just like, it's that sort of thing where it's now this is his farewell tour. If Sidney Crosby comes out after the 26-27 season and goes, I'm signing a 1-year deal, 1,000,000.87, to keep it affordable and keep it over the league min. It'd be like the Mariano Rivera farewell tour. You want to keep throwing more
more comparisons out there from other sports. Yeah, it would be like Rivera, but I feel like at the same time, Crosby would not come out and he would never outwardly admit that this is my last year, because that would be, in his eyes, a distraction to the team's success. So right. I don't think he would ever come out and say that, but I could see him doing that with the knowledge of, this will be my last season. A select few will know this will be my last season
internally.
And you might be able to read the tea leaves, but it's never going to be said explicitly. But I again,
you'll be able to read the tea leaves whenever it's his last game at, I almost said the Wachovia Center. Oh boy, at in Philly, and they're giving him a presentation. Like, when that's happening, you know this is it. When the Flyers are giving him his flowers.
Yeah, that would be so non-Philly of them. I almost don't want them to do that. I almost want them to be like, yeah, no, we're the only team in the league that is not going to do anything for you, Sid.
We're going to do it in the back hallway with no media around. Okay, come on.
Grady's going to hand you a plaque. You're going to shake his hand and you're going to walk away. That's going to be it. But at the end of the day, that is a problem. That is a conversation for a couple years down the road. Yes. Fun to bounce back and forth with here. But the big news of the day is Sidney Crosby signs a 2-year extension. He is under contract for 3 more seasons, and Penguins fans, they get to watch one of the greatest to ever do it for another 3 years. Let's talk about the Prospects Challenge, because when we talk about having a successful weekend, I think that is understating the fact. The Penguins go a perfect 3-0 and essentially win the tournament. There's not really a big to do about who's winning the tournament, who's getting the championship, but the Penguins for the second consecutive season have the best record of all 6 teams that are at the Prospects Challenge. They had a 6-3 win over the Boston Bruins on Friday, a 4-2 win over the Ottawa Senators on Saturday, and an 8-5 win over the Buffalo Sabres yesterday evening. Again, second straight year with their best record, a really solid weekend of hockey for the Penguins prospects. And I think when I look at this, there's obviously a lot of the discussion about, which players stepped up, which players had breakouts, which players kind of stole the show. I think there's 2 that, in my eyes, outside of a lot of really good honorable mentions, Sergei Murashov and Avery Hayes both had very good weekends. Murashov, of course, it was his first competitive action in North America. We talked leading up to this that every time he stepped on the ice, he became the story. I think it's fair to say that he did the same thing over the weekend. Now, he wasn't perfect by no means, but again, the Penguins were 3-0. Murashov played 6 of the 9 periods between the pipes for the Penguins, including the only goaltender, I should say, to get a full game. I think that the Penguins see a lot of things coming up for Murashov very quickly, considering how much they wanted to see of him at this Prospects Challenge. And the last thing I'll say about the goaltending is I really do feel for Taylor Gauthier. I mean, the guy was the ECHL goalie of the year, and now he's surpassed by the 20-year-old, 21-year-old Russian goaltender, Sergei Murashov.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Who knows? Maybe he still has an NHL career ahead of him.
Maybe.
It just doesn't look like it's going to be here with the way Blomqvist performed last year and the way Murashov performed this year, and the 2 NHL goaltenders that are already on the roster.
Yeah,
that could be around for a little bit longer. It's unfortunate, but I mean, it's tough when you are a goalie and there's only 2 spots on an NHL roster, really, sometimes 3, depending on the team, and that goes per team. Just that's the way the cookie crumbles. It's unfortunate for him, but for the Penguins, they have a good problem to have here.
Yeah.
A couple of NHL goalies on the roster, a couple of budding NHL goalies or future NHL goalies right behind them. And Murashov stealing the show is, for a late round pick, huge. And they clearly wanted to see a lot from him. And judging by, I didn't see a ton of the Prospect Challenge games, but judging by what Twitter was saying, by what you're saying, and by how the score outcomes looked, he's impressing. He's been given the push, and he is taking his opportunities.
Yeah, and again, you mentioned it. It's a tough position because if you're the fifth best goaltender in the Penguins organization, you're an ECHL starting goaltender. If you're the fifth best center in the Penguins organization, you're moved over to the wing and you're playing in the NHL pretty much the entire season. So it's a tough position to crack. And Taylor Gauthier is a guy who stepped up to the challenge last year. Again, hope that he gets some AHL opportunities. Hope that he gets some opportunities to prove that he can move up in rank. But it is tough when you're behind two studs like Joel Blomqvist and Sergei Murashov. The other name I mentioned was Avery Hayes, and this is really deja vu because last year at the Prospects Challenge, everybody said, wow, Avery Hayes, sneaky, solid weekend. Nothing sneaky about his weekend, including a 5-point performance on Monday night where he had a hat trick and 2 assists for the Penguins to clinch that final game against Buffalo. Avery Hayes is a name that you are going to hear a lot more about this year. Last year, he had about 20 some odd games at the AHL level. This year, I think you're going to see a lot more of that. And he's a name that, everybody wanted to see: the McGroartys, the Ponomarevs, the Koivunins, the Owen Pickerings on the back end, Emil Pienaniemi and Murashov. Avery Hayes was on the first line, and he was not a passenger on that first line. He was somebody who was driving play a lot for the Penguins, and he's somebody that I'm very excited to see how he can build off of this, right? Last year we said, and every year we say, all right, who had a good prospects challenge? What can they do once the big boys get on the ice? Because they're not going to go, toe-to-toe a lot with the Crosbys and the Malkins, but in those inter-squad scrimmages, they're going to have some shifts against them. How does Avery Hayes kind of build off of what he started in Buffalo over this weekend?
Yeah, watching him build on, like you said, what he just started in Buffalo is going to be huge. I'm trying to nail down what kind of contract he's got rolling with him right now, because there's some work to be had there if he is to become a legitimate option for the NHL roster. Again, maybe not this year, but he's 21, can play a full season in the AHL, and then maybe earn his way into an NHL deal for next season. Again, this team is building for the future, and I don't want to say they're one of the more underrated prospect pools in the league, because they are still ranked pretty low, and rightfully so in a lot of cases. And I think maybe I look at them as underrated because I focus on them quite a bit. We're always discussing prospects between the two of us. I spent a lot of time digging into who is good and bad in the Penguins prospect pool without really looking into a bunch of others. So the way I see it is the Penguins like the top guys they got. And if these new names can keep kind of forcing their way into the conversation, again, I'm not saying the Penguins can be a great team with this core of prospects, but they can be a solid NHL team if that core of prospects develops correctly, develops nicely. And with $19 million in cap space, Kyle Dubas builds a nice team around them of other more proven NHLers.
Yeah, speaking of Avery Hayes' contract, just to clean that one up, he has 1 year left on an American Hockey League contract with the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. So
there you go.
He signed a 2-year deal before last season, so we'll see if he's able to kind of earn himself that next deal because he's going into a contract year. I mentioned there were a couple honorable mentions: Rutger McGroarty and Vasily Ponomarev, who were Hayes' line mates on the Penguins' top line. McGroarty, of course, went out there and did what we wanted him to do, like show that you are one of the best players on the ice this weekend. He did that from front to back, and the one thing that was evident from the drop of the puck on Friday, his first shift, he had, I think, 3 body checks in on the forecheck and forced a couple turnovers. His forechecking game is going to earn him a lot of acclaim from Mike Sullivan, but so too with Vasily Ponomarev. That's a name that, obviously we knew because he came over in the Gensel deal, which is high profile, and everybody that follows the Penguins is going to look at that name and say, all right, what can you do now? But I thought he looked really good, especially on a line together with McGroarty and with Hayes, and Ponomarev's forechecking as well was something that, man, if these two can continue to build together, in the case that McGroarty doesn't make the NHL team out of camp, that's going to be a scary duo whenever they're together, if they're together in the American Hockey League. Again, I lean towards McGroarty being somebody who makes the roster, but you never know what's going to happen, what's going to play out over the next 2 weeks. But both of them looked good. And the last honorable mention that I have, Tristan Brose. This is a name that kind of, after he was drafted, he kind of faded into the back. He had a rough year at the University of Minnesota, which is why our friend State of Hoppy, who was on the show last week, doesn't like to talk about it very much. He ends up leaving, going to Denver, winning a national championship, creating a lot of buzz around him last year with the season that he had. Signs his contract with Pittsburgh, and he looked, we talk about McGroarty needing to look like one of the best players out there. Tristan Brose, every time he stepped on the ice, the talent jumps off of the screen at you. He has a heavy one-timer. It connected on Friday for a beautiful goal against the Bruins. He just missed the net on Monday on a similar shot in the same area on the power plays, but this is a guy that is going to be extremely entertaining all season long. I'm very excited to see what Brose has in store. And again, I think he's a long shot to make his NHL debut this season. I think a lot would have to go right for him, but he is certainly somebody who has elevated his stature within the organization tenfold over the last 6 or 7 months.
I could see an NHL debut this season. Here's my rationale.
Maybe a cup of coffee, but
yeah. It would be injury replacement. It would be the Penguins are in injury trouble with high-end guys, not necessarily the depth. It is starting the season in the AHL, starting with an impressive camp preseason, and then starting the season in the AHL and continuing that impressive run, and then injury troubles happen because it's the Penguins, and that's bound to happen. Knock on wood. There you go. They're due for an injury-riddled season almost. So keeping guys like Tristan Brose at the ready, and a bunch of other names that we'll discuss in a few minutes at the ready, if he is impressing enough, I could see, like you're saying, a quick cup of coffee NHL debut this season to see what he's got under him, especially if he impresses through camp, through preseason, and through the start of the AHL season.
Yeah, and again, a lot of things got to go right for him, but I am excited to see what he has and the development that he's able to have, because when you look at Wilkes-Barre this year, I mean, he's down there. You would imagine one or both of Ponomarev and Koivunen are down there. You have Pickering, who will be down there. Bello was interesting. He did not play on Monday, but he was very interesting on Friday. That was the game where, I called him a loud defenseman on Twitter. It's because he's similar to, and I don't want to make this comparison as in the players are the same, but similar to Carlson. You will hear his name and you will see him a lot. He's not a defenseman that's going to fade into the back and just be the Marcus Pettersson. Hey, haven't heard much about him. Well, that's a good thing. He is somebody who's going to jump up into the play. He's somebody who likes the puck on his stick. He had a loud performance on Friday, a couple of penalties, but he's a name that I'm intrigued to see where they put him to start this year. He spent a lot of time in the ECHL last year. Do they give him that opportunity in the A? I think that's something to follow along with as well. But let's move over and close this out talking about players like an Isaac Bello, maybe a little bit higher stature, maybe a little bit more of an opportunity at the NHL level. When training camp opens tomorrow, again, today is creative day. So we'll see some nice vignettes. We'll see some nice videos, some sneak peeks of stuff we'll see throughout the season on the various platforms that the Penguins have. But tomorrow, the rubber meets the road. Pens are out there. Training camp begins. Formal team activities. No more informal skates that we've seen over the last week or so. Horwat, before we go, give me one player that you're keying in on over the next few weeks. And we're going to stay away from the Crosbys because everybody's going to watch the Crosbys, the Malkins, the Latangs, the O'Connors, the Rusts. What is one player that maybe not everybody knows to look for that you think you're going to look for over the next few weeks at Penguins camp?
I have two. I'll keep one of them quick. Valtteri Puustinen is one to watch, mostly because with the additions that Kyle Dubas made for the Penguins roster this season, all of a sudden his spot doesn't seem guaranteed.
Yeah.
As guaranteed as it looked toward the end of last year, suddenly there's some new names just in the way. But another name to keep an eye on, and could be one of the names going up against Valtteri Puustinen here, is fellow countryman Jesse Puljujarvi. Mostly because I forgot he was kind of on this team for a while, but also has NHL ability and might be able to pull through with something if he has a good camp and if he has a good preseason, because he has good uses. It's just a matter of finally, maybe, hopefully at this point, being fully healthy and ready to go at the NHL level and with the Penguins organization. Mm-hmm. Those are kind of the two names, and they kind of go hand in hand a little bit. And maybe they had guaranteed spots until this offseason happened.
Yeah, with Puljujarvi, he didn't have a training camp last year. Now, he had plenty of time to ramp up before signing that PTO and eventual contract with the Penguins, but this is the first time that he had an offseason. Again, maybe not completely healthy going into the offseason, but he had an offseason where he wasn't fully rehabbing the injury and he could actually rest a little bit and then ramp up as normal NHLers would ramp up. So what does that do for his game? I think that's going to be a big question that needs answered over the next couple of weeks. And like you, I'm excited to see what those answers are. The name that I will throw out there, because of a similar reason, because his placement in the Penguins roster, on the Penguins organization, on the depth chart, is very unknown, is Cody Glass. He was one of these, well, the team that he's on is trying to get rid of his cap hit because they want to be able to maneuver under the cap. Penguins take him on along with, I should say, a draft pick. So what happens for a fresh start for Cody Glass? He's 25 years old. So you would think he's got plenty of leg left. What does that look like in Pittsburgh? What does this fresh start do for Cody Glass? And what is his placement within the organization? Where do they see him? Do they see him as a center? Do they see him as a winger? If so, do they see him as somebody who is on the outside looking in or on the inside looking out at a roster spot as camp opens? And we'll know some of those answers as early as tomorrow. Who's he practicing with? I know that Mike Sullivan likes to say, and he will say it again tomorrow, I promise you this, don't look into my lines on the first day of training camp, please. But there are certain threads that continue throughout camp that you see to begin forming on day one. I want to see if there are any of those threads for Cody Glass, or if he's somebody that they're saying, listen, we don't know. Like, we have an idea, but we really don't know until he gets out there on the ice with some of these guys where we think he's going to fit best. I'm excited to see where the Penguins think he fits. I'm excited to see how he responds to being traded once again and coming to this organization, an organization that Crosby said it yesterday on the back porch of some random person in probably the North Hills. There's a lot of competition, probably more competition than Crosby has seen since he came to Pittsburgh 19 years ago. Where does Cody Glass fit into that? And how does he respond to getting that opportunity? I'm keeping my eyes on Cody Glass over the next couple of weeks. Preseason games, practices, all of it. I'm going to be zeroing in on Cody Glass more so than I am on a lot of other players.
I think it was Mars, PA, by the way. I think to narrow down the neighborhood. Not to dox those people, but anyway. He's a true utility guy. Cody Glass can play probably anywhere. It's a matter of what Mike Sullivan wants to do with him right away. Is he even in the NHL roster? Is he a center? Is he a winger? Mm-hmm. Top six, bottom six. It's the true utility guy that can probably filter in wherever you want to put him, and it's just a matter of performing.
Yeah, it's either Sean Rodriguez of the 2024-25 Pittsburgh Penguins. We shall wait and see. But on that note, that is all for this episode of The Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube. Make sure you like, share, subscribe on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh, or you can find us anywhere you get your podcast from. Again, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review. We love nothing more than to get all of that under the belt as the 2024-25 season. We keep saying it's getting close. Pens, formal practice tomorrow. It's getting very close. But that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time.